Gluttony is considered traditionally one of the 7 deadly sins. Gluttony refers to usually an excessive desire for food, or it actually has some ancient kind of disturbing practices where people eat and then keep eating until they would pass out. But the word glut, G-L-U-T-T, just means an excessive quantity of anything. People in the stock market will speak of there's a glut in the market, whether it's some product that there's too much of and the prices go down. They'll speak of a glut in the market. But I think we all know that there's ways of gourting ourselves, even committing the sin of gluttony, with things other than food. Video games, YouTube videos, alcohol, all these things are not intrinsically bad, but we can gourd on them where they're not good for us. And we know that for many decades, people have had a glut of TV. We hear about this especially when that holy and wonderful religious congregation known as the Oompa Loompas sang about this, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, when they were singing about Mike TV, and that one line that sang, "What do you get from a glut of TV? A pain in the neck and an IQ of 3. There's some wisdom in that little ditty right there. I think it is not completely untrue. We also say that some people in different situations are gluttons for punishment. They're gluttons for punishment. They have an excessive and hardship, work, emotional stress. Whatever they're doing, maybe they're always failing at. And we call them gluttons for punishment, but we don't use it in a negative sense. Sometimes it's in an admirable sense. There were some kids in my high school and college that every time they asked a girl on a date, they were constantly getting turned down. Constantly was rejected. We say, man, that guy's a glutton for punishment. Many of those guys eventually did get married. They persevered through the disappointment and eventually were successful. Sometimes this happens in business. It often happens in athletics, and I've always admired, even though felt sorry for that. I'm familiar with certain teams, high school teams especially, that we would say, man, these guys are gluttons for punishment because they weekly, in and out, are getting pummeled. We used to scout different teams, football teams, before we would play them. In Austin, there was a school called Austin Johnston. Now, they've changed their name for different reasons, but they were the Johnston Rams, and we would scout them. And in football, they would just get pummeled every week, every Friday, 30, 40, 50, 60, sometimes 70 to nothing. And they would get back out on the field and do it again. And part of me admired them. I remember once they got beat 36 to nothing by Churchill in soccer. That's hard to do. It's hard to do. But they got out there. Now, none of them probably became professional athletes in any sense of the word, but some of them might have become husbands and fathers. And I think they might have been good ones. Why? Because they pushed through the adversity, got back out there on the field, even though everything was against them. The Beatitudes today are Jesus giving his message of his kingdom, when he is inaugurating his kingdom, a kingdom that turns everything else on his head, which on first glance seems like the first Christians were asked to be gluttons for punishment. He starts to say they're blessed. That's what beatitude means. Blessed are this and that. Blessed are the poor, those who mourn, those who are meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And then he gives his statement that all of these will be satisfied. What? Some translations say they will have their fill. Fill of what? If you're always mourning and thirsting and hungry and you're poor. And then he lays it down even more intensively. He says, they will insult you and persecute you and utter every kind of insult against you because of me. And your reward will be great in heaven. What? All this sounds like they were asked to be gluttons for punishment. No, it's a gluttony of grace, of reward, of blessings, of holiness. There are some things I think we can have a glut of in a good way. You can never have too much of salvation, of vindication, of victory over hell. That's why most of our celebrations here are called a feast. A feast. A wedding feast. We're asked to have the fullness of God, a fullness of Christ in the Eucharist, body, blood, soul, and divinity. And then when it comes to sacrament, prayer, holiness, salvation, mission, maybe these things we can have a gluttony of, a glut on. Having said that, we can look at what is the opposite of too much, a glut. Well, one of the words we use is a dearth. It's a fancy word, a dearth, a lack, a need. And we often speak of this when it comes to vocations, to priesthood and religious life, and even married life. There are many more people now in the United States than there were in the 1950s. But the amount of priests, religious, and weddings have dropped. Well, what happened? Well, we can have a whole hour, 2-hour-long reflection on the sexual revolution. But I think it's a world that decided to be gluttonous of the world. Of the world, not a sacrifice. To have it all. Money, wealth, riches. To have it all without responsibility. But we now know we've had plenty of time to look back over all these me generations of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and even now. I know that those things are fleeting. The things of this world are fleeting. They leave us hollow and empty. And if you go into communities where there's a lot of poverty, violence, crime, confusion, graffiti, alcoholism, and drug addiction, you find there's a dearth of fathers. That's just a fact. I know, I've been there. It's a dearth of fathers and fatherhood. And I think we have to encourage that. We have to be able to look at our culture. I think it's good to even look at Hollywood and academia. I was looking up a few old movies that I would like, and oftentimes movies that included families, fathers, and priests, more often than not, especially the priests, were seen as the idiots, the buffoons, the fools. Fathers were the buffoons, the foolish, the ones to rebel against. I was rewatching something I saw when I was 8 or 9, Mary Poppins. Watch it. It's about a family. It's about a family, even, you could even say, dare I say it, The Sound of Music. You're about a family with a father who believes in discipline, investing in the future, being responsible. And then somebody swoops in like Mary Poppins and says, don't listen to him. Don't listen to him. Just go with the flow. Do what you want. And they're the ones who, in the end, have a conversion. They become more open. But I think when we look at Christianity again, it is easy to think or easy to see how maybe the people in Jesus' time looked at Jesus as a glutton for punishment. Especially on Good Friday. That he endured, didn't have to, he could have ran away from mocking, being spit at, arrested, tortured, crucified, humiliated. He must have been a glutton for punishment. But I think one of the dynamic things that happen at the Easter Vigil and Holy Week is Jesus showed us that you've let the devil gourd himself, become a glutton of hate, of rage, of death, of blood, of vengeance, that he can use that against him. He used death to defeat death. Little did the devil know he was doing his undoing, because Jesus was showing us what real love is. It's something that we do with our bodies. We give them away. We find, as John Paul II said, we find ourselves, we make a sincere gift of ourselves. We don't see the world as what can it do for me? What can I get out of it? We have people say that here when they come to Mass, and they stop coming. Well, I didn't get anything out of it. Well, you weren't paying attention then. You weren't paying attention because you get everything, all of Jesus. So I would say to all of you that when we look back, especially on the 70s, 80s, 90s, the gluttony of the world and found wanting, the sexual revolution, that there still is time. We can still undo. We can still look at the past and take the good things from the past, things that were celebrated, families, children, marriage, priests and sisters. And we all have a role to play. If you look around, there's some of these little cards in your pew, and it asks you to do a little work. You can mail these in yourself. You can go on the website. You can use the QR codes that we have in the back. But if you know someone, a young person especially, someone who's single, who you think would be a good priest, make a good priest or a sister, write their information down, send it in. You don't even have to tell them. And let the diocese and us contact them. Now, if it's someone in your family and they get a call, they're going to say, Dad, did you do this? Mom, did you do this? Maybe. But you can let us do the hard work. And so what I'm hoping for today is that we'll send in a glut of cards, a glut of them. That hopefully we can have a glut of vocations. That we can feast on these things of service and mission. And we as priests have to do a better job of this and letting you know. And so I will do that now. I love being a priest. I love it. I have more fun than most of you. I do. I have more women in my life than all of you. And I get to be a glut on talking about the faith. I love it. Yesterday, I went to Cameron. I got to be on a radio show. Then I came back here, prepared my homily, said Mass, drove up to Waco, sat in a confessional for a few hours and heard confessions until I was blue in the face. It was exhausting, and it was a privilege. Let me say that again. It was exhausting, but it was a privilege to be on the front lines, especially with young people who are in the thick, in the glut of a culture of death, who know just living out their Catholic faith, they will be persecuted. They will be persecuted. And how hard it is when they come to Mass or these conferences and then go back to their schools. And even their teachers ridicule them or mock them. You know, even here at our parish, we have a glut of altar servers. Thank you, Mike. We have a glut of altar servers. We had a whole slew of altar servers that were supposed to serve today, but they're all up in Waco. And so we just grabbed the other boys here, thank God, because we have lots of them. But that took work. That took work. But I would say when it comes to the sacraments, blessing, conversions, holiness, maybe we can be gluttonous in this regard. Because these things are not sinful. They're not deadly sins. They're signs of life and abundant life and of abundant life. So when it comes to these aspects of our world, grace, sacraments, blessing, conversions, holiness. When it comes to all that, let's be gluttonous.